online security remains a top priority for users and consumers of services alike. So it's hardly surprising that online service providers are increasingly offering security services as part of their portfolios, but this time using network virtualization functions, or NFV. So why this particular technology?
The demand for NFV is quite simple. It's network function virtualization. So we've had several decades of manufacturers creating hardware to specifically take care of certain needs. So one piece of hardware would do one thing while another do another. And then we've come to the point where it needs to be more standardized. And the easiest way to standardize is to virtualize all those services and virtualize all that functionality onto the new, just a standard VMware type images within the carriers. And so as you start to look at, taking a lot of the functionality that's been specifically or been proprietary and virtualizing it, that opened the door for more advances in these technologies. It opened the door for security to come into these technologies and kind of set the stage of how the future really will be designed as more of an open platform and open system, so where now enterprises and clouds can interoperate much easier because it's now more openly standard.
How much outlay does it need, and what's the commitment for the provider?
One of the really best things about NFV type solutions is you're now going from a hardware solution to a software-based solution. And in a lot of instances, as an example with Wedge, it's no longer a CapEx expense. There's not a big upfront expense for it, it's an OpEx expense. Because we will install the system and everything really at no charge. We're sharing in the revenue that they're getting. So for them, it's not an upfront cost much at all, where in the past you had to buy proprietary hardware and you had a big CapEx to start with.
And what if the provider prefers a different model?
There are certainly some parts of the world where they still prefer to have more of a, I don't want to say proprietary, but they want to have a more standardized, this particular piece of hardware is my IPS, this particular piece of hardware is my firewall. So in those cases, we can build, and we are building, Wedge is doing it, where we will have a standard VMware imaged box, but it is hard-loaded as a firewall, or it is hard-loaded as a gateway instead of being open source where it could change.
And what's the industry analyst's view?
Software-defined security is still fairly emerging. It's relatively new. It does actually support greater flexibility, certainly the open standards, and scalability. And then if you look at it in terms of the management of the security environment for applications, I think it absolutely fits that very well. There are some issues that need to be considered, for example, the investment in greater tools around DVI or analytics. But on the whole, as we continue this progression towards SDN and a much more open cloud environment, it just very, very neatly fits into that big piece of the digital puzzle.
The trick with any sort of network capability is to drive customer stickiness. And we're seeing shortening contracts for services around the network. And anything we can do to build further value propositions to the enterprise by enabling functions in the network, the better it's going to be for the carriers. It's conversely better for the enterprise as well, because they remain facing that challenge. We're also seeing a rapidly evolving security landscape. There are increased and differing levels of threat. Every time we solve one threat, we have another. So by being able to put those things into the network, to be able to deliver services like our friends at Wedge Networks are providing, and similar sort of deep packet inspection and dynamic honeypots and so forth, we're going to be able to offer a much richer security framework to people and move that security framework down the value chain. Because traditionally, MNCs and global enterprises have been able to afford massive and complex, highly managed security environments, whereas SMEs, SMBs and other organizations are left with, I've got McAfee on my laptop. That doesn't help me with a security environment. And because security penetrations and security threats can make an exploit from any device connected in the network, we almost want to be able to offer that same level of high protection across the entire spectrum of connected devices.
And how do the service providers see it?
If we look at how NFV is actually evolving, NFV is about being able to have specialized units or specialized systems taking functions out of the core network switch and being able to run that across different network systems. So what that implies is that we can actually have best-in-class, in a perfect world, we can have best-in-class applications or the functions, the network functions, which typically may not exist in the network layer in the switch itself. So just to give you an example, from our perspective, the kind of solutions that we are delivering on our current network together with our partners, UTM, right, Unified Threat Management, which allows us to basically defend the networks for ourselves and for our customers. DDoS, right, DDoS with Arbor, we used Arbor technology, which allows us to manage all the DDoS attacks, as well as I talked a little bit about in the morning, the ability to have two-factor authentication using the SafeNet solutions, which actually protects the access to the network. So we are trying to work across various aspects of protecting the network, protecting the systems, protecting the data for our customers. NFV would actually allows and helps to have specialized applications like these, which would then obviously be updated, would be current, would be efficient, would not load the network and take away, you know, the speed of operations and add to latency and things like that. And so it's a natural fit, which allows you to have a much more secure and better network.
I think it's going to help provide greater transparency in terms of what really needs to be secure and what can be open. We've seen that in the cloud environment already in terms of how we can have private cloud environments and we can have public cloud and even hybrid. And I think the security element that gets brought in through NFV allows us to look at it in the same way. So to start thinking about what level of security we want to add into certain applications, whether we're looking at supply chain, whether we're looking at internal businesses, it's basically giving the customers much more choice and ultimately much more control in terms of how they define their business security policy.
I think most customers appreciate that we can provide the security services to the customers. With the amount of bandwidth growth of the internet consumption in enterprises, it's a lot easier for us to implement the security on the network as a backbone side, and the customer can be more or less secure, assured that okay, at least it has been screen filter or that has been some preventive measure has been done on the network side, so they appreciate that, and then it makes their life easier. On the other hand, we do find that good security engineers or good security technical people, at the end of the day, they tend to want to work for themselves because the market is expanding. Some would end up in some consultant companies, and some tend to work with us. So for the customer, it's a big relief if they can offload that work to our network. And of course, in response to your second question about churn, it make a big stickiness to the network. It's a little bit harder for our competitor to compete us on that one. And in fact, we have a subsidiary company who's doing specifically for the security for enterprises. So that's really, security has become a big issue, and it's been a good, unique customer selling proposition for us.
One single, easy to set up service that promises to increase ARPU, reduce churn, and make a lot of customers happy. Is it too good to be true?
That really fits very well for Wedge because we have over 1,000 installs around the world that are doing exactly that. And the beauty of using NFV-S and SDN-S is when it's really functioning properly, your software, which Wedge has, is scalable. And so as we're installed and running, as the bandwidth increases need, we just automatically partition more VMware resources, and then as the bandwidth goes down, we give those resources back. So that's just a beautiful story for the service providers. We're only using the resources that are needed, yet we're able to accomplish this solution for the end user, and we're actually able to do this at a much larger scale and much higher throughputs than were ever imagined before. So before NFV and SDN really came along, this solution was not capable. You could not do this with hardware before, but using those two technologies and being able to capitalize on the way you can be elastic with them, we can now provide to hundreds of thousands to even millions of users off of one image install, which was never capable before today.